We are back with Lit by the Fire. All the windows are open and a cool breeze is rushing through this room, which seems appropriate given our subject today. The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. This book is like a breeze that's going to go through your life. We pick up chapter 3 with the chapter titled The Man Who Was Thursday, the title chapter. And I am looking forward to bringing you on the next stage of this journey. So, without further ado, let us begin. Before one of the fresh faces could appear at the doorway, Gregory's stunned surprise had fallen from him. He was beside the table with a bound and a noise in his throat like a wild beast. He caught up the Colt's revolver and took aim at Syme. Syme did not flinch, but he put up a pale and polite hand. "Don't be such a silly man," he said, with the effeminate dignity of a curate. "Don't you see it's not necessary? Don't you see that we're both in the same boat? Yes, and jolly seasick." Gregory could not speak, but he could not fire either, and he looked his question. "Don't you see we've checkmated each other?" cried Syme. "I can't tell the police you're an anarchist. You can't tell the anarchists I'm a policeman. I can only watch you, knowing what you are. You can only watch me, knowing what I am. In short, it's a lonely intellectual duel, my head against yours. I'm a policeman deprived of the help of the police. You, my poor fellow, are an anarchist deprived of the help of that law and organization which is so essential to anarchy. The one solitary difference is in your favor. You are not surrounded by inquisitive policemen. I am surrounded by inquisitive anarchists. I cannot betray you, but I might betray myself. Come, come, wait and see me betray myself. I shall do it so nicely." Gregory put the pistol slowly down, staring at Syme as if he were a sea monster. "I don't believe in immortality," he said at last. "But if, after all this, you were to break your word, God would make a hell only for you to howl in forever." "I shall not break my word," said Syme sternly, "nor will you break yours. Here are your friends." The mass of anarchists entered the room heavily, with a slouching and somewhat weary gait. But one little man, with a black beard and glasses, a man somewhat of the type of Mr. Tim Healy, detached himself and bustled forward with some papers in his hand. "Comrade Gregory," he said, "I suppose this man is a delegate." Gregory, taken by surprise, looked down and muttered the name of Syme, but Syme replied almost pertly, "I am glad to see that your gate is well enough guarded to make it hard for anyone to be here who was not a delegate." The brow of the little man with the black beard was, however, still contracted with something like suspicion. "What branch do you represent?" he asked sharply. "I should hardly call it a branch," said Syme, laughing. "I should call it, at the very least, a root." "What do you mean?" "Well, the fact is," said Syme serenely, "the truth is I am a Sabbatarian. I have been especially sent here to see that you show a due observance of Sunday." The little man dropped one of his papers, and a flicker of fear went over all the faces of the group. Evidently, the awful president, whose name was Sunday, did sometimes send down such irregular ambassadors to such branch meetings. "Well, comrade," said the man with the papers after a pause, "I suppose we'd better give you a seat for the meeting." "If you ask my advice as a friend," said Syme with severe benevolence, "I think you'd better." When Gregory heard the dangerous dialogue end, With a sudden safety for his rival, he rose abruptly and paced the floor in painful thought. He was indeed in an agony of diplomacy. It was clear that Syme's inspired impudence was likely to bring him out of all merely accidental dilemmas. Little was to be hoped from them. He could not betray Syme himself, partly from honor, but partly also because if he betrayed him, and for some reason failed to destroy him, the Syme who escaped would be a Syme freed from all obligation of secrecy, a Syme who would simply walk to the nearest police station. After all, it was only one night's discussion, and only one detective who would know of it. He would let out as little as possible of their plans that night, and then let Syme go and chance it. He strode across to the group of anarchists, which was already distributing itself along the benches. "I think it is time we began," he said. "The steam tug is waiting on the river already. I move that Comrade Buttons takes the chair." This being approved by a show of hands, the little man with the paper slipped into the presidential seat. "Comrades," he began, as sharp as a pistol shot, "our meeting tonight is important, though it need not be long. This branch has always had the honor of electing Thursdays for the Central European Council. We have elected many and splendid Thursdays. We all lament the sad decease of the heroic worker who occupied the post until last week. As you know, his services to the cause were considerable. He organized the great dynamite coup of Brighton, which, under happier circumstances, ought to have killed everybody on the pier. As you also know, his death was as self-denying as his life, for he died through his faith in a hygienic mixture of chalk and water as a substitute for milk, which beverage he regarded as barbaric and as involving cruelty to the cow. Cruelty, or anything approaching to cruelty, revolted him always. But it is not to acclaim his virtues that we are met, but for a harder task. It is difficult properly to praise his qualities, but it is more difficult to replace them. Upon you, comrades, it devolves this evening to choose out of the company present the man who shall be Thursday. If any comrade suggests a name, I will put it to the vote. If no comrade suggests a name, I can only tell myself that that dear dynamiter who is gone from us has carried into the unknowable abysses the last secret of his virtue and his innocence." There was a stir of almost inaudible applause, such as is sometimes heard in a church. Then an old large man with a long and venerable white beard, perhaps the only real working man present, rose lumberingly and said, "I move that Comrade Gregory be elected Thursday," and sat lumberingly down again. "Does anyone second?" asked the chairman. A little man with a velvet coat and pointed beard seconded. "Before I put the matter to the vote," said the chairman, "I will call on Comrade Gregory to make a statement." Gregory rose amid a great rumble of applause. His face was deadly pale, so that by contrast his queer red hair looked almost scarlet. But he was smiling and altogether at ease. He had made up his mind, and he saw his best policy quite plain in front of him like a white road. His best chance was to make a softened and ambiguous speech, such as would leave on the detective's mind the impression that the anarchist brotherhood was a very mild affair after all. He believed in his own literary power, his capacity for suggesting fine shades and picking perfect words. He thought that with care he could succeed, in spite of all the people around him, in conveying an impression of the institution subtly and delicately false. Syme had once thought that anarchists, under all their bravado, were only playing the fool. Could he not now, in the hour of peril, make Syme think so again? "Comrades," began Gregory in a low but penetrating voice, "it is not necessary for me to tell you what is my policy, for it is your policy also. Our belief has been slandered. It has been disfigured. It has been utterly confused and concealed, but it has never been altered. Those who talk about anarchism and its dangers go everywhere and anywhere to get their information, except to us, except to the fountainhead. They learn about anarchists from sixpenny novels. They learn about anarchists from tradesmen's newspapers. They learn about anarchists from Alley Sloper's Half Holiday and the Sporting Times. They never learn about anarchists from anarchists. We have no chance of denying the mountainous slanders which are heaped upon our heads from one end of Europe to the other. The man who has always heard that we are walking plagues has never heard our reply. I know that he will not hear it tonight, though my passion were to rend the roof. For it is deep, deep under the earth that the persecuted are permitted to assemble, as the Christians assembled in the catacombs. But if by some incredible accident there were here tonight a man who all his life had thus immensely misunderstood us, I would put this question to him. When those Christians met in those catacombs, what sort of moral reputation had they in the streets above? What tales were told of their atrocities by one educated Roman to another? Suppose, I would say to him, suppose that we are only repeating that still mysterious paradox of history. Suppose we seem as shocking as the Christians, because we are really as harmless as the Christians. Suppose we seem as mad as the Christians, because we are really as meek. The applause that had greeted the opening sentences had been gradually growing fainter, and at that last word it stopped suddenly. In the abrupt silence, the man with the velvet jacket said in a high, squeaky voice, "I'm not meek." "Comrade Witherspoon tells us," resumed Gregory, "that he is not meek. Ah, how little he knows himself. His words are indeed extravagant. His appearance is ferocious, and even to an ordinary taste, unattractive. But only the eye of a friendship as deep and delicate as mine can perceive the deep foundation of solid meekness which lies at the base of him, too deep even for himself to see. I repeat, we are the true early Christians, only that we come too late. We are simple as they revere simple. We look at Comrade Witherspoon. We are modest as they were modest. Look at me. We are merciful. No, no, called out Mr. Witherspoon with the velvet jacket. I say we are merciful, repeated Gregory furiously, as the early Christians were merciful. Yet this did not prevent their being accused of eating human flesh. We do not eat human flesh. Shame, cried Witherspoon. Why not? Comrade Witherspoon, said Gregory with a feverish gaiety, is anxious to know why nobody eats him. Laughter. In our society, at any rate, which loves him sincerely, which is founded upon love. No, said Witherspoon, down with love. Which is founded upon love, repeated Gregory, grinding his teeth. There will be no difficulty about the aims which we shall pursue as a body, or which I should pursue were I chosen as the representative of that body. superbly careless of the slanders that represent us as assassins and enemies of human society, we shall pursue with moral courage and quiet intellectual pressure the permanent ideals of brotherhood and simplicity. Gregory resumed his seat and passed his hand across his forehead. The silence was sudden and awkward, but the chairman rose like an automaton and said in a colorless voice, "Does anyone oppose the election of Comrade Gregory?" The assembly seemed vague and subconsciously disappointed, and Comrade Witherspoon moved restlessly on his seat and muttered in his thick beard. By the sheer rush of routine, however, the motion would have been put and carried, but as the chairman was opening his mouth to put it, Syme sprang to his feet and said in a small and quiet voice, "Yes, Mr. Chairman, I oppose." The most effective fact in oratory is an unexpected change in the voice. Mr. Gabriel Syme evidently understood oratory. Having said these first formal words in a moderated tone with a brief simplicity, he made his next word ring and volley in the vault as if one of the guns had gone off. "Comrades!" he cried, in a voice that made every man jump out of his boots. "Have we come here for this? Do we live underground like rats in order to listen to talk like this? This is talk we might listen to while eating buns at a Sunday school treat. Do we line these walls with weapons and bar that door with death, lest anyone should come and hear Comrade Gregory saying to us, 'Be good and you will be happy. Honesty is the best policy, and virtue is its own reward'? There was not a word in Comrade Gregory's address to which a curate could not have listened with pleasure. Hear, hear! But I am not a curate. Yee-woo! And I did not listen to it with pleasure. Yeah-woo! The man who is fitted to make a good curate is not fitted to make a resolute, forcible, and efficient Thursday. Hear, hear! Comrade Gregory has told us, in only too apologetic a tone, that we are not the enemies of society, but I say that we are the enemies of society, and so much the worse for society. We are the enemies of society, for society is the enemy of humanity, its oldest and most pitiless enemy. Hear, hear! Comrade Gregory has told us, apologetically, again, that we are not murderers. There I agree. We are not murderers. We are executioners. Cheers! Ever since Syme had risen, Gregory had sat staring at him, his face idiotic with astonishment. Now, in the pause, his lips of clay parted, and he said, with an automatic and lifeless distinctness, "You damnable hypocrite!" Syme looked straight into those frightful eyes with his own pale blue ones and said, with dignity, "Comrade Gregory accuses me of hypocrisy. He knows as well as I do that I am keeping all my engagements and doing nothing but my duty. I do not mince words. I do not pretend to. I say that Comrade Gregory is unfit to be Thursday for all his amiable qualities. He is unfit to be Thursday because of his amiable qualities. We do not want the Supreme Council of Anarchy infected with a maudlin mercy. Hear, hear! This is no time for ceremonial politeness. Neither is it a time for ceremonial modesty. I set myself against Comrade Gregory as I would set myself against all the governments of Europe, because the anarchist who has given himself to anarchy has forgotten modesty as much as he has forgotten pride. Cheers! I am not a man at all. I am a cause! Renewed cheers! I set myself against Comrade Gregory as impersonally and as calmly as I should choose one pistol rather than another out of that rack upon the wall, and I say that rather than have Gregory and his milk and water methods on the Supreme Council, I would offer myself for election. His sentence was drowned in the deafening cataract of applause. The faces that had grown fiercer and fiercer with approval in his tirade grew more and more uncompromising, were now distorted with grins of anticipation or cloven with delightful cries. At the moment when he announced himself as ready to stand for the post of Thursday, a roar of excitement and assent broke forth and became uncontrollable. And at the next same moment, Gregory sprang to his feet with foam upon his mouth and shouted against the shouting, "Stop, you blasted madmen!" he cried at the top of a voice that tore his throat. "Stop, you!" But louder than Gregory's shouting and louder than the roar of the room came the voice of Syme, still speaking an appeal of pitiless thunder. "I do not go to the council to rebut that slander that calls us murderers. I go to earn it." Loud and prolonged cheering. "To the priest who says these men are the enemies of religion, to the judge who says these men are the enemies of law, to the fat parliamentarian who says these men are the enemies of order and public decency, to all these I will reply, you are false kings, but you are true prophets. I am come to destroy you and to fulfill your prophecies." Oh, the heavy clamor gradually died away, but before it had ceased, Witherspoon had jumped to his feet, his hair and beard all on end, and had said, "I move as an amendment that Comrade Syme be appointed to the post." "Stop all this, I tell you," cried Gregory with frantic face and hands. "Stop it, it is all..." The voice of the chairman clove his speech with a cold accent. "Does anyone second this amendment?" he said. A tall, tired man with melancholy eyes and an American chin beard was observed on the back bench to be slowly rising to his feet. Gregory had been screaming for some time past. Now there was a change in his accent, more shocking than any scream. "I end this," he said in a voice as heavy as stone. "This man cannot be elected. He is a..." "Yes?" said Syme, quite motionless. "What is he?" Gregory's mouth worked twice without sound. Then slowly the blood began to crawl back into his dead face. "He is a man quite inexperienced in our work," he said, and sat down abruptly. Before he had done so, the long, lean man with the American beard was again upon his feet and was repeating in a high American monotone, "I beg to second the election of Comrade Syme." "The amendment will, as usual, be put first," said Mr. Buttons, the chairman, with mechanical rapidity. "The question is that Comrade Syme..." Gregory had again sprung to his feet, panting and passionate. "Comrades," he cried out, "I am not a madman." Oh, said Mr. Witherspoon. "I am not a madman," reiterated Gregory, with a frightful sincerity which for the moment staggered the room. "But I give you a counsel, which you can call mad if you like. No, I will not call it a counsel, for I can give you no reason for it. I will call it a command. Call it a mad command, but act upon it. Strike, but hear me. Kill me, but obey me. Do not elect this man." Truth is so terrible, even in fetters, that for a moment Syme's slender and insane victory swayed like a reed. But you could not have guessed it from Syme's bleak blue eyes. He merely began. Comrade Gregory commands. Then the spell was snapped, and one anarchist called out to Gregory, "Who are you? You are not Sunday." And another anarchist added in a heavier voice, "And you are not Thursday." "Comrades," cried Gregory in a voice like that of a martyr who in an ecstasy of pain is passed beyond pain, "it is nothing to me whether you detest me as a tyrant or detest me as a slave. If you will not take my command, accept my degradation. I kneel to you. I throw myself at your feet. I implore you, do not elect this man." "Comrade Gregory," said the chairman after a painful pause, "this is really not quite dignified." For the first time in the proceedings, there was, for a few seconds, a real silence. Then Gregory fell back in his seat, a pale wreck of a man, and the chairman repeated like a piece of clockwork suddenly started again. "The question is that Comrade Syme be elected to the post of Thursday on the General Council." The roar rose like a sea, the hands rose like a forest, and 3 minutes afterwards, Mr. Gabriel Syme of the Secret Police Service was elected to the post of Thursday on the General Council of the Anarchists of Europe. Everyone in the room seemed to feel the tug waiting on the river, the sword stick and the revolver waiting on the table. The instant the election was ended and irrevocable, and Syme had received the paper proving his election, they all sprang to their feet, and the fiery groups moved and mixed in the room. Syme found himself, somehow or other, face to face with Gregory, who still regarded him with a stare of stunned hatred. They were silent for many minutes. "You are a devil," said Gregory at last. "And you are a gentleman," said Syme with gravity. "It was you that entrapped me," began Gregory, shaking from head to foot. "Entrapped me into—" "Talk sense," said Syme shortly. "Into what sort of devil's parliament have you entrapped me, if it comes to that? You made me swear before I made you. Perhaps we are both doing what we think right. But what we think right is so damn different that there can be nothing between us in the way of concession. There is nothing possible between us but honor and death." And he pulled the great cloak about his shoulders and picked up the flask from the table. "The boat is quite ready," said Mr. Buttons, bustling up. "Be good enough to step this way." With a gesture that revealed the shopwalker, he led Syme down a short, iron-bound passage, the still agonized Gregory following feverishly at their heels. At the end of the passage was a door which Buttons opened sharply, showing a sudden blue and silver picture of the moonlit river that looked like a scene in a theater. Close to the opening lay a dark, dwarfish steam launch like a baby dragon with one eye. Almost in the act of stepping on board, Gabriel Syme turned to the gaping Gregory. "You have kept your word," he said gently, with his face in shadow. "You are a man of honor, and I thank you. You have kept it even down to a small particular. There was one special thing you promised me at the beginning of the affair, and which you have certainly given me by the end of it." "What do you mean?" cried the chaotic Gregory. "What did I promise you?" "A very entertaining evening," said Syme, and he made a military salute with the sword stick as the steamboat slid away. Chapter 4. The Tale of a Detective. Gabriel Syme was not merely a detective who pretended to be a poet. He was really a poet who had become a detective. Nor was his hatred of anarchy hypocritical. He was one of those who are driven early in life into too conservative an attitude by the bewildering folly of most revolutionists. He had not attained it by any tame tradition. His respectability was spontaneous and sudden, a rebellion against rebellion. He came of a family of cranks, in which all the oldest people had all the newest notions. One of his uncles always walked about without a hat, and another made an unsuccessful attempt to walk about with a hat and nothing else. His father cultivated art and self-realization. His mother went in for simplicity and hygiene. Hence the child during his tenderer years was wholly unacquainted with any drink between the extremes of absinthe and cocoa, of both of which he had a healthy dislike. The more his mother preached a more than Puritan abstinence, the more did his father expand into a more than pagan latitude. And by the time the former had come to enforcing vegetarianism, the latter had pretty well reached the point of defending cannibalism. Being surrounded with every conceivable kind of revolt from infancy, Gabriel had to revolt into something. So he revolted into the only thing left: sanity. But there was just enough in him of the blood of those fanatics to make even his protest for common sense a little too fierce to be sensible. His hatred of modern lawlessness had been crowned also by an accident. It happened that he was walking in a side street in the instance of a dynamite outrage. He had been blind and deaf for a moment, and then seen the smoke clearing, the broken windows, and the bleeding faces. After that, he went about as usual, quiet, courteous, rather gentle, but there was a spot on his mind that was not sane. He did not regard anarchists, as most of us do, as a handful of morbid men combining ignorance with intellectualism. He regarded them as a huge and pitiless peril, like a Chinese invasion. He poured perpetually into newspapers and their waste paper baskets a torrent of tales, verses, and violent articles warning men of this deluge of barbaric denial. But he seemed to be getting no nearer his enemy, and, what was worse, no nearer a living. As he paced the Thames embankment, bitterly biting a cheap cigar and brooding on the advance of anarchy, there was no anarchist with a bomb in his pocket so savage or so solitary as he. Indeed, he always felt that government stood alone and desperate, with its back to the wall. He was too quixotic to have cared for it otherwise. He walked on the embankment once under a dark red sunset. The red river reflected the red sky, and they both reflected his anger. The sky, indeed, was so swarthy, and the light on the river relatively so lurid, that the water almost seemed a fiercer flame than the sunset it mirrored. It looked like a stream of literal fire winding under the vast caverns of a subterranean country. Syme was shabby in those days. He wore an old-fashioned black chimney-pot hat. He was wrapped in a yet more old-fashioned cloak, black and ragged, and the combination gave him the look of the early villains in Dickens and Bulwer Lytton. Also, his yellow beard and hair were more unkempt and leonine than when they appeared long afterward, cut and pointed on the lawns of Saffron Park. A long, lean, black cigar, bought in Soho for 2 pence, stood out from between his tightened teeth, and altogether he looked a very satisfactory specimen of the anarchists upon whom he had vowed a holy war. Perhaps this was why a policeman on the embankment spoke to him and said, "Good evening." Syme, in a crisis of his mortal fears for humanity, seemed stung by the mere stolidity of the automatic official, a mere bulk of blue in the twilight. "A good evening, is it?" he said sharply. "You fellows would call the end of the world a good evening. Look at that bloody red sun and that bloody river. I tell you that if that were literally human blood spilt and shining, you would still be standing here as solid as ever, looking out at some poor, harmless tramp whom you could move on. You policemen are cruel to the poor, but I could forgive you even your cruelty if it were not for your calm." If we are calm," replied the policeman, "it is the calm of organized resistance." "Eh?" said Syme, staring. "The soldier must be calm in the thick of the battle," pursued the policeman. "The composure of an army is the anger of a nation." "Good God, the board school," said Syme. "Is this undenominational education?" "No," said the policeman sadly. "I never had any of those advantages. The board schools came after my time. What education I had was very rough and old-fashioned, I am afraid." "Where did you have it?" asked Syme, wondering. "Oh, at Harrow," said the policeman. "The class sympathies, which, false as they are the truest things in so many men, broke out of Syme before he could control them. 'But, good Lord, man,' he said, 'you oughtn't to be a policeman.' The policeman sighed and shook his head. 'I know,' he said solemnly, 'I know I am not worthy.'" "But why did you join the police?" asked Syme with rude curiosity. "For much the same reason that you abused the police," replied the other. "I found that there was a special opening in the service for those whose fears for humanity were concerned rather with the aberrations of the scientific intellect than with the normal and excusable, though excessive, outbreaks of the human will. I trust I make myself clear." "If you mean that you make your opinion clear," said Syme, "I suppose you do. But as for making yourself clear, it is the last thing you do. How comes a man like you to be talking philosophy in a blue helmet on the Thames Embankment?" "You have evidently not heard of the latest developments in our police system," replied the other. "I am not surprised at it. We are keeping it rather dark from the educated class, because that class contains most of our enemies. But you seem to be exactly in the right frame of mind. I think you might almost join us." "Join you in what?" asked Syme. "Oh, I will tell you," said the policeman slowly. "This is the situation. The head of one of our departments, one of the most celebrated detectives in Europe, has long been of opinion that a purely intellectual conspiracy would soon threaten the very existence of civilization. He is certain that the scientific and artistic worlds are silently bound in a crusade against the family and the state. He has, therefore, formed a special corps of policemen who are also philosophers. It is their business to watch the beginnings of this conspiracy, not merely in a criminal, but in a controversial sense. I am a Democrat myself, and I am fully aware of the value of the ordinary man in matters of ordinary valor or virtue, but it would obviously be undesirable to employ the common policeman in an investigation which is also a heresy hunt." Syme's eyes were bright with a sympathetic curiosity. "What do you do then?" he said. "Well, the work of a philosophical policeman," replied the man in blue, "is at once bolder and more subtle than that of the ordinary detective. The ordinary detective goes to pothouses to arrest thieves. We go to artistic tea parties to detest pessimists. The ordinary detective discovers from a ledger or a diary that a crime has been committed. We discover from a book of sonnets that a crime will be committed. We have to trace the origin of those dreadful thoughts that drive men on at last to intellectual fanaticism and intellectual crime. We were only just in time to prevent the assassination at Harthole Pool, and that was entirely due to the fact that our Mr. Wilkes, a smart young fellow, thoroughly understood a triolet." Do you mean, asked Syme, that there is really as much connection between crime and the modern intellect as all that? You are not sufficiently democratic, answered the policeman, but you were right when you said just now that our ordinary treatment of the poor criminal was a pretty brutal business. I tell you, I am sometimes sick of my trade when I see how perpetually it means merely a war upon the ignorant and the desperate. But this new movement of ours is a very different affair. We deny the snobbish English assumption that the uneducated are the dangerous criminals. We remember the Roman emperors. We remember the great poisoning princes of the Renaissance. We say that the dangerous criminal is the educated criminal. We say that the most dangerous criminal now is the entirely lawless modern philosopher. Compared to him, burglars and bigamists are essentially moral men. My heart goes out to them. They accept the essential ideal of man. They merely seek it wrongly. Thieves respect property. They merely wish the property to become their property, that they may more perfectly respect it. But philosophers dislike property as property. They wish to destroy the very idea of personal possession. Bigamists respect marriage, or they would not go through the highly ceremonial and even ritualistic formality of bigamy. But philosophers despise marriage as marriage. Murderers respect human life. They merely wish to attain a greater fullness of human life in themselves by the sacrifice of what seems to them to be lesser lives. But philosophers hate life itself, their own as much as other people's. Syme struck his hands together. How true that is, he cried. I have felt it from my boyhood, but never could state the verbal antithesis. The common criminal is a bad man, but at least he is, as it were, a conditional good man. He says that if only a certain obstacle be removed, say a wealthy uncle, then he is prepared to accept the universe and to praise God. He is a reformer, but not an anarchist. He wishes to cleanse the edifice, but not to destroy it. But the evil philosopher, he is not trying to alter things, but to annihilate them. Yes, the modern world has retained all those parts of police work which are really oppressive and ignominious. The harrowing of the poor, the spying upon the unfortunate. It has given up its more dignified work. The punishment of powerful traitors in the state and powerful heresiarchs in the church. The moderns say we must not punish heretics. My only doubt is whether we have a right to punish anyone else. But this is absurd, cried the policeman, clasping his hands in an excitement uncommon in persons of his figure and costume. But it is intolerable. I don't know what you're doing, but you're wasting your life. You shall join our special army against anarchy. Their armies are on our frontiers. Their bolt is ready to fall. A moment more, and you may lose the glory of working with us, perhaps the glory of dying with the last heroes of the world. It is a chance not to be missed, certainly, assented Syme. But still, I do not quite understand. I know as well as anybody that the modern world is full of lawless little men and mad little movements, but beastly as they are, they generally have the one merit of disagreeing with each other. How can you talk of their leading one army or hurling one bolt? What is this anarchy? Do not confuse it, replied the constable, with those chance dynamite outbreaks from Russia or from Ireland, which are really the outbreaks of oppressed, if mistaken, men. This is a vast philosophic movement consisting of an outer and an inner ring. You might even call the outer ring the laity and the inner ring the priesthood. I prefer to call the outer ring the innocent section and the inner ring the supremely guilty section. The outer ring, the main mass of their supporters, are merely anarchists. That is, men who believe that rules and formulas have destroyed human happiness. They believe that all the evil results of human crime are the results of a system that has called it crime. They do not believe that the crime creates the punishment. They believe that the punishment has created the crime. They believe that if a man seduced 7 women, he would naturally walk away as blameless as the flowers of spring. They believe that if a man picked a pocket, he would naturally feel exquisitely good. These I call the innocent section. Oh, said Syme. Naturally, therefore, these people talk about a happy time coming, the paradise of the future, mankind freed from the bondage of vice and the bondage of virtue, and so on. And so also the men of the inner circles speak, the sacred priesthood. They also speak to applauding crowds of the happiness of the future and of mankind freed at last, but in their mouths, and the policeman lowered his voice, in their mouths, these happy phrases have a horrible meaning. They are under no illusions. They are too intellectual to think that man upon this earth can ever be quite free of original sin and the struggle. And they mean death. When they say that mankind shall be free at last, so they mean that mankind shall commit suicide. When they talk of a paradise without right or wrong, they mean the grave. They have but 2 objects: to destroy first humanity and then themselves. That is why they throw bombs instead of firing pistols. The innocent rank and file are disappointed because the bomb has not killed the king, but the high priesthood are happy because it has killed somebody. How can I join you? Asked Syme with a sort of passion. I know for a fact that there is a vacancy at the moment, said the policeman, as I have the honor to be somewhat in the confidence of the chief whom I have spoken. You really should come and see him. Or rather, I should not say see him. Nobody ever sees him, but you can talk to him if you like. Telephone? Inquired Syme with interest. No, said the policeman placidly. He has a fancy for always sitting in a pitch-dark room. He says it makes his thoughts brighter. Do come along. Somewhat dazed and considerably excited, Syme allowed himself to be led to a side door in the long row of buildings of Scotland Yard. Almost before he knew what he was doing, he had been passed through the hands of about 4 intermediate officials, and was suddenly shown into a room the abrupt blackness of which startled him like a blaze of light. It was not the ordinary darkness in which forms can be faintly traced. It was like suddenly going stone blind. Are you the new recruit? Asked a heavy voice. And in some strange way, though there was not the shadow of a shape in the gloom, Syme knew 2 things. First, that it had come from a man of massive stature. And second, that the man had his back to him. Are you the new recruit? Said the invisible chief, who seemed to have heard all about it. All right, you are engaged. Syme, quite swept off his feet, made a feeble fight against this irrevocable phrase. I really have no experience, he began. No one has any experience, said the other, of the Battle of Armageddon. But I really am unfit. You are willing. That is enough, said the unknown. Well, really, said Syme, I don't know any profession of which mere willingness is the final test. I do, said the other. Martyrs. I am condemning you to death. Good day. Thus it was that when Gabriel Syme came out again into the crimson light of evening in his shabby black hat and shabby, lawless cloak, he came out a member of the new detective corps for the frustration of the great conspiracy, acting under the advice of his friend the policeman, who was professionally inclined to neatness. He trimmed his hair and beard, bought a good hat, clad himself in an exquisite summer suit of light blue-gray, with a pale yellow flower in the buttonhole, and in short became that elegant and rather insupportable person whom Gregory had first encountered in the little garden of Saffron Park. Before he finally left the police premises, his friend provided him with a small blue card on which was written "The Last Crusade" and a number, the sign of his official authority. He put this carefully in his upper waistcoat pocket, lit a cigarette, and went forth to track and fight the enemy in all the drawing rooms of London. Where his adventure ultimately led him, we have already seen. But about 1:30 on the February night, he found himself steaming in a small tug up the silent Thames, armed with swordstick and revolver, the duly elected Thursday of the Central Council of Anarchists. When Syme stepped out onto the steam tug, he had a singular sensation of stepping out into something entirely new, not merely into the landscape of a new land, but even into the landscape of a new planet. This was mainly due to the insane yet solid decision of that evening, though partly also to an entire change in the weather and the sky since he entered the little tavern some 2 hours before. Every trace of the passionate plumage of the cloudy sunset had been swept away, and a naked moon stood in a naked sky. The moon was so strong and full that, by a paradox often to be noticed, it seemed like a weaker sun. It gave not the sense of bright moonshine, but rather of a dead daylight. Over the whole landscape lay a luminous and unnatural discoloration, as of that disastrous twilight which Milton spoke of as shed by the sun in eclipse. So that Syme fell easily into his first thought, that he was actually on some other and emptier planet, which circled round some sadder star. But the more he felt this glittering desolation in the moonlit land, the more his own chivalric folly glowed in the night like a great fire. Even the common things he carried with him, the food and the brandy and the loaded pistol, took on exactly that concrete and material poetry which a child feels when he takes a gun upon a journey or a bun with him to bed. The swordstick and the brandy flask, though in themselves only the tools of morbid conspirators, became the expressions of his own more healthy romance. The swordstick became almost the sword of chivalry, and the brandy the wine of the stirrup cup. And even the most dehumanized modern fantasies depend upon some older and simpler figure. The adventurers may be mad, but the adventurer must be sane. The dragon without St. George would not even be grotesque. So this inhuman landscape was only imaginative by the presence of a man really human. To Syme's exaggerative mind, the bright, bleak houses and terraces by the Thames looked as empty as the mountains of the moon, but even the moon is only poetical because there is a man in the moon. The tug was worked by 2 men, and with much toil went comparatively slowly. The clear moon that had lit up Chiswick had gone down by the time they had passed Battersea, and when they came under the enormous bulk of Westminster, day had already begun to break. It broke like the splitting of great bars of lead, showing bars of silver, and these had brightened like white fire when the tug, changing its onward course, turned inward to a large landing stage rather beyond Charing Cross. The great stones of the embankment seemed equally dark and gigantic as Syme looked up at them. They were big and black against the huge white dawn. They made him feel that he was landing on the colossal steps of some Egyptian palace. And indeed, the thing suited his mood, for he was, in his own mind, mounting to attack the solid thrones of horrible and heathen kings. He leapt out of the boat on to one slimy step, and looked and stood a tall, a dark and slender figure amid the enormous masonry. The two men in the tug put her off again and turned upstream. They had never spoken a word. All right, and with that, we end for this evening. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you're enjoying this delightful journey, and we'll see you next time.